Hello, my name is Brendan and I'm from Australia. Welcome to my channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join me on this exciting journey. I'm so glad to have you here. Six Little Ducklings by KATHARINE, PYLE, 1863-1938. Old Mother Duck and her 6 little ducklings lived in a hollow tree down by the river, and they were all as happy as could be. They had the whole wide, sparkling river to swim in, and no one bothered them or chased them around. Mother Duck hadn't always lived in the hollow tree. She used to live in a farmyard out in the countryside, far from the river, but she wasn't very happy there. For one thing, there was a grumpy old watchdog in the yard. He stayed chained up to his cattle during the day and wasn't let loose until the other animals had gone to bed. But he would snap at the ducks and chickens whenever they got too close, which frightened them. There was also no good place to swim, just a small, muddy duck pond that nearly dried up in the heat of summer. But the worst thing about the farm was the way the farmer's wife kept taking Mother Duck's eggs. No matter how carefully she hid them, the farmer's wife always found them and took them away. Once, she even put a bunch of them in a hen's nest and let the hen sit on them. Eventually, the hen hatched out 11 of the cutest, fluffiest, yellowest ducklings anyone had ever seen. The hen was as proud as if she'd laid the eggs herself, but she didn't know the first thing about raising ducklings. Mother Duck could tell right away. The hen didn't even want the ducklings to get their feet wet, and nearly had a heart attack when they went swimming one day. After that, Mrs. Duck decided she wasn't going to stay on the farm any longer. Early one morning, without telling anyone, she wandered off into the big, wide world, kept going till she found the hollow tree by the river. There she built a nest, hatched her own little brood, and raised them the way ducklings should be raised. She was very happy. There were 6 little ducklings, and their names, from oldest to youngest, were Squdge, Quick, Buff, Pintoes, Fluffy, and the tiniest, most adorable one of all, Curlytail. Buff, Fluffy, and Curlytail were girls, and the other 3 were boys. One beautiful day, with the wind blowing and the leaves rustling, while the little wood rabbits hopped around kicking their heels in excitement, Mother Duck told the ducklings she was going to take them on a picnic. "Oh, yay, yay!" they shouted, flapping their wings in excitement. Mother Duck took out a little basket made of meadow grass that an old muskrat had woven for her, and she and the ducklings filled it up with lunch. There was fresh watercress, wild celery, little snails, and all kinds of tasty things that little ducklings loved to eat. Once the basket was packed, they set off. The ducklings thought they were going to head down to the river, but instead, Mother Duck led them into the woods, away from the water. "Where are we going, Mother? Where are we going?" the little ducklings asked. Mother Duck just smiled, shook her head, and wouldn't tell them. After a while, they came out of the woods into a meadow with a big pile of rocks. "This is where we'll have our picnic," said Mother Duck. She put down the basket, unpacked the food, and then she and the ducklings sat down to eat. Oh, how delicious it all was, just like picnic food always is. After they had eaten all they could, Mother Duck said, "Come on now, let's climb to the top of the rocks and see what we can find." Climbing over the rocks was fun too. The ducklings scrambled, slipped and squeaked while their mother helped them along. Eventually, they made it to the very top of the highest rock, and ho, how the wind blew up there. "Now look," said Mother Duck. "Do you see over there?" She pointed with her wing to a farmyard in the distance. "That's where I used to live." "Well, Mother," the ducklings cried, "we thought you'd always lived by the river in our tree." "No, not at all. I lived in that farmyard," their mother replied. She began telling them about her life there and how, if she had stayed, they might have had a hen as their mother instead of her. The little ducklings were horrified at the idea of having another mother. They'd never seen a hen and asked what it was. Mother Duck tried to explain, but they didn't quite understand. "I wouldn't want a hen as a mother," Squdge said, "but I'd like to see a farmyard, hear a dog bark and listen to a cow moo. Do they make as much noise as thunder? Will you take me there sometime, Mother?" But Mother Duck told him, Absolutely not. It's too dangerous to go back to the farmyard. If the farmer and his wife saw you, they might catch you and lock you in a coop, and you'd never be able to escape. The thought of that scared the other ducklings, but Squudge said bravely, "They couldn't catch me. I can peck really hard and run really fast. I wish you'd take me there just to see it all, Mother." Mother Duck didn't reply because, looking up, she saw dark rain clouds gathering in the sky. "Hurry, children, hurry," she cried. "There's a storm coming, and we need to get home before it starts." They scrambled down the rocks in a rush and hurried through the woods as fast as their little legs could carry them. They moved so quickly that they reached the hollow tree just as the first big raindrops began to fall. They were all out of breath and pretty tired, especially Curly Tail. But as Mother Duck said, it didn't really matter as long as they had avoided getting soaked. It was so cozy inside the dry hollow tree, with the rain pouring harder and harder outside and streaming down the trunks. After a while, the ducklings took out their toys and started to play, but they soon grew tired of that. Snuggling up around their mother, they begged her to tell them a story. "The story?" said Mother Duck. "All right, what should it be about?" "Tell us the story of Wiggle Waggle Whisktail," shouted Squudge and Quick. "No, no, please don't tell that one," Curly Tail begged, almost in tears. "It's too sad, Mother. It always makes me cry." "I wouldn't cry over a story," Squudge said proudly. "Go on, Mother, tell it, please." The other ducklings agreed, so Mother Duck told Curly Tail that if she didn't want to listen, she could go play by herself for a while, and when that story was done, she could come back and pick another one, another story she liked, and Mother Duck would tell it next. Being sweet and obedient, Curly Tail quietly went to the corner, took out a doll, and started playing while Mother Duck told the others the story. And this is the sad tale of Wiggle Waggle Whisktail. Wiggle Waggle Whisktail was a very naughty little duckling. He often argued with his brothers and sisters and always wanted the best for himself, and worst of all, he disobeyed his kind, loving mother. His behaviour worried her so much that sometimes she didn't know what to do. Again and again, Wiggle Waggle's mother told him never to go outside when it was raining. "You know I've told you that too, my dears," added Mother Duck. "It's very bad for little ducks to be out in the rain. Ponds, puddles and rivers are fine, but rain coming from above, like from the sky or waterfalls, is dangerous. Sometimes ducks can even drown in it." One day it started raining heavy around Wiggle Waggle Whisktail's house. His mother was very busy that day. She didn't have time to keep a close eye on her children, but she never thought that any of them would be silly enough to go out in the rain. She warned them too many times about how dangerous it was. But Wiggle Waggle Whisktail never listened to what anyone had told him. He waited until his brothers and sisters were occupied with their games, then he quietly slipped outside into the rain. Oh, how good it felt! He tilted his beak and greedily caught the raindrops as they fell. "It's wet," Wiggle Waggle Whisktail said to himself. "Not wet enough." Just around the corner, a drain pipe came down from the roof of the farmhouse. Water poured from it like a waterfall, roaring as it gushed out. "Wow, this is the wettest thing I've ever seen," cried Wiggle Waggle. "I think I've found the perfect spot." So he waddled right under the drain pipe, where the water poured down the hardest. It felt great on his back. He lifted his head, opened his beak wide, and gulped down the water as quickly as he could. Soon he was wet inside as well as out, just how he wanted to be. "If only Mum could see me now," he chuckled to himself. He'd be swallowing and swallowing and swallowing until eventually he drank so much water that he burst, just like a balloon that's been inflated too much. And that was the end of him. It wasn't until the rain stopped that his mother realised he was missing. She came out to look for him but couldn't find him anywhere. She called and called for him, but he didn't respond. He never came home. Then his mother cried for him, and his brothers and sisters wept for him, but they never saw Wiggle Waggle Whisktail again because he was lying beneath the rain pipe, all burst. That was the sad story of Wiggle Waggle Whisktail, which always made Curlytail cry. She wouldn't come out of the corner until it was all over. But when she finally did, and it was to her turn to choose a story, she picked something very different, something funny that made all the little ducklings laugh and laugh. But their mother liked to tell the story of Wiggle Waggle Whisktail from time to time. She thought it was a valuable lesson for them. The rain had finished falling during the night, and the next morning, when the little ducklings woke up, they were thrilled to find the sun shining brightly. That meant it was time to head down to the river for their usual swim. Not long after breakfast, the whole family set off for the river. The ducklings dashed ahead, while Mother Duck waddled after them. Only Curlytail stayed close to her side, walking alongside her and holding on to the fold of her skirt. She always liked to be near her mother. "Don't go into the water until I get there, children," Mother Duck called after them. "No, Mother, we won't," the ducklings replied. Squdge was a big, plump, active duckling who could run faster than the others. He was first to reach the riverbank. Once there he started searching for the tasty treats, like fat beetles, grasshoppers, or tadpoles. He was quite the greedy duck. Time and again, his mother had to remind him to share with his siblings, but he didn't always listen. Though scanning the ground with his bright black eyes, he suddenly spotted a small round hole near the mudbank. Just poking out of the hole was what it looked like, the tail of a particularly fat worm. "Oh, wow," thought Squdge to himself. "What a delicious find. I'll just pull it out and eat it before any of the others come and want to share." He quickly grabbed the tail with his small beak and started to pull it on it tightly. The tail didn't belong to a worm at all. It was actually a little brown snake that had been lying in its home fast asleep. When the snake felt something nipping its tail and holding on, it became very scared. It started to pull and struggle to break free, while Squdge kept pulling, determined to get it out. He thought, "It must be a really fat worm if it's pulling this hard." The more the snake pulled, the more determined he was to catch it. Before Squdge could pull it out, Queek and the other ducklings noticed him and ran over, eager to see what he'd caught. They all grabbed hold of the tail and started pulling together. Their combined strength was too much for the snake, and they dragged it out longer and longer until its head finally slipped out of the hole. The snake twisted around, hissing in fright. When the ducklings realized they had caught a snake instead of a worm, they were so terrified that they fell backward on the ground and lay there, too scared to move. They didn't even look to see if the snake had left or was preparing to swallow them. If they had only known, the snake was just as scared as they were, and as soon as it was free, it quickly slipped away into the water to soothe its pinched tail. They were still lying there when their mother and Curlytail arrived. At first, Mother Duck didn't know what had happened to them. She was worried they might be hurt or sick. But once she helped them up and saw they were just frightened, she began to laugh. "But now you see, children," she said more seriously, "this is what happens when you're greedy. If you hadn't rushed to catch the worm and gobble it up, you would have waited for me, and I would have told you that it wasn't a worm at all, it was a snake." The little ducks felt really ashamed of themselves. They realized they had acted very silly and greedy. They also felt sad because their mother said they were too hot. They had to sit on the bank for a while to cool off. Then she took Curlytail to a shallow spot in the river and caught a nice little tadpole for her, while her brothers and sisters had to sit in a row along the bank and watch. Before long, their mother called over, and the little ducklings happily ran down the slope and jumped into the water. There, they paddled around, dove under the surface, and raced each other in the water, completely forgetting their adventure with the snake. When the ducklings stayed home instead of going to the river, especially when it was too cold or stormy for swimming, they had plenty of toys to keep them entertained. Squdge and Queek had a little cart, and they had trained a tame little beetle to pull it. Sometimes they would give their dolls a ride in the cart. There were 2 dolls. One belonged to Fluffy and the other to Curlytail. Mrs. Muskrat, the same old muskrat who made their mother's picnic basket, had crafted the dolls for them. She used 2 old, gnarled pieces of root, which she ignored and shaped with her sharp teeth until they resembled little wooden ducklings. Fluffy and Curlytail loved their little duckling dolls more than anything else they owned. They would dress and undress them and take them to bed at night, sometimes even bring them down to the river. The other ducklings often wished they had dolls too, but Mrs. Muskrat had only made 2, one for Fluffy and one for Curlytail. Here's how it happened, and that she made the dolls for them and not for the others. One day, the duck family had gone to the river for their usual swim. Afterward, Mother Duck felt very sleepy. She sat down on the riverbank in the warm sun, and all the little ducklings gathered around her, blinking in the sunlight until they all drifted off to sleep. The ducklings were the first to wake up. They stirred, opened their eyes, and soon said, "Mother, can we explore up the riverbank a little? We're tired of staying in the one spot." Mother Duck was too sleepy to do more than open her eyes just a tiny bit. "Yes, but don't go too far and stay out of the water," she murmured. The little ducks promised, and off they ran, laughing and playing together. Before long, they reached a spot where the riverbank was quite high, hanging over the water. They started entertaining themselves by pushing bits of mud and pebbles over the edge and enjoying the splashes they made. Suddenly they heard something rustling down below. They paused, listening carefully, and looked around. Squudge and Pintoes even crawled to the edge of the bank and leaned too far over, trying to see what was making the noise. Fluffy, feeling nervous, worried they might fall into the river if they weren't careful. Suddenly, out from under the bank swam old Mrs. Muskrat. Her house was right beneath where the ducklings were standing, though they hadn't realised it. She had been busy finishing her housework and was now setting out on an errand down the river. She always swam when she needed to go anywhere. It was quicker and safer than walking. She wore a calico dress, a white apron, and big spectacles perched on her nose. All her clothes were waterproof, shedding water just like a duck's feathers. She looked so funny with her nose almost in the water, her dress puffing up and her tail dragging behind her, that some of the ducklings started laughing. "Oh, don't laugh," Fluffy begged, always the polite little duckling. "She might hear you." "Oh, she won't. She can't hear us from down there," said Queek. "I don't care if she does," Squudge cried. "She looked so funny." He laughed so hard he almost fell over. And all the other ducklings began to laugh too, except Fluffy and Curlytail. The 2 of them didn't laugh. Instead, they felt bad that their brothers and sisters were being so rude to an older animal. It was some relief that Mrs. Muskrat didn't turn around to see them. What they didn't know was that Mrs. Muskrat didn't need to turn around to see them. When the light hit her spectacles, they acted like mirrors, and she could see what was happening behind her. She saw Squudge laughing and pointing at her, and she saw the others laughing too. Everyone except Fluffy and Curlytail, who looked worried and sad. Even though she saw all this, she didn't react. She just kept swimming quietly down the river until she was out of sight. But a few days later, an old toad knocked on the door of the hollow tree with a message from Mrs. Duck. This toad had been living down by the river for a while, but it was so damp there that it gave him joint pain. So he decided to move up into the woods where it was drier. Mrs. Muskrat had heard about this move, so she asked him, since he'd be passing the hollow tree, to leave a message for her. Here was the message. She wanted Mother Duck to send the 2 ducklings who hadn't laughed at her the other day to come and visit. It was something very important. "That's me and Curlytail, Mother. We were the ones who didn't laugh," cried Fluffy. "But what do you think she wants with us, Mother?" "I don't know. You'd better go and find out." Fluffy and Curlytail weren't very eager to go. They felt a bit shy about heading down the river alone for a visit. "I'll go," said Squudge. "I don't mind." "No, you won't," their mother said firmly. "You've been too naughty. Mrs. Muskrat doesn't want to see any duckling who was as rude to her as you were." Finally, Mother Duck told Fluffy and Curly-Tail that she would walk part of the way with them. She took them down until they could see Mrs. Muskrat's house, and then she sent them on by themselves. Fluffy and Curly-Tail walked very slowly, often glancing back to see their mother watching them. "Will you knock when we get there, Curly-Tail?" asked Fluffy. "No, you knock." "I don't want to. You knock." But in the end, neither of them had to knock, because when they arrived, Mrs. Muskrat was already expecting them. She came out smiling and looking quite friendly and pleasant, despite her long rat-like teeth. "So, you're the two little ducklings who didn't laugh at me the other day," Mrs. Muskrat said. That's right, that's right. I like it when little animals are polite and respectful. Now, I have a gift for you that I think you'll like." She went back inside her house, and when she returned, she was carrying two little duckling dolls. "Here, these are for you," she said, handing one to Fluffy and one to Curly-Tail. The ducklings could hardly believe their eyes. They had never seen anything so cute or beautiful before. "But these are for us? Really?" they exclaimed. "Yes, they are," Mrs. Muskrat replied with a smile, looking just as pleased as they were. Fluffy and Curly-Tail didn't know how to thank her enough. They were so excited to show their new dolls to their mother. After saying goodbye to Mrs. Muskrat, they hurried back to where Mother Duck was waiting for them. "Look, Mother, look at what we got," they cried. Mrs. Duck took the dolls and inspected them. "Why, yes, these are very lovely," she said. "Wasn't it kind of Mrs. Muskrat to give you such wonderful gifts? You'll need to be very careful not to break them." "Oh, yes, we will. We promise," the delighted little ducklings replied. When they got back to the tree and the other ducklings saw the beautiful gifts Mrs. Muskrat had given them, they wished they hadn't laughed at her. Maybe then they would have gotten dolls too. But it was too late for that now.